You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
Och Hjelmin och Nackler Schwarzenegger!
Ronaldinho Gaucho. Ya lo hace. Pierna derecha, directo al arco. ¡Golazo! 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 ¡Golazo!
This is Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio, your new live show about the beautiful game in all its glory, with Dwayne Rollins and Kevin Laramee. MLS, EPL, La Liga, Champions League, all is fair game. Powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us at sportspodcastingnetwork.com.
Things were a little dicey yesterday here in the Soccer Today world. I was shocked and appalled when 55-1 selected Kevin in the MLS podcasting expansion draft, but I was able to get him back. It took a life supply of poutine and a pound of Canadian bacon, but I'm proud to have Kevin back. It was worth the price, Kevin. Thanks for your patience yesterday.
Yeah, it's a situation close to what Clint Irwin went through yesterday, where he was picked, but not really. We talked about in yesterday's show how Clint Irwin's name in the unprotected list for Toronto stood out, and it was not a coincidence that he was there. He was used basically by Atlanta to get home boy Mark Bloom back to Georgia for him and some gam for Clint Irwin.
Yeah, and look, TFC, when I saw that list, I mentioned Mark Bloom would be someone that might be interesting to them as well. And he's a Georgia native, and he has a young family. His wife, I believe, works in the military.
Yes, they are in the South in Georgia.
Yeah, exactly. So Toronto was going to do the right thing and get him back close to home anyway. So it worked out for all involved, really. Even Clint Irwin, I think, probably was pulled aside sometime. That would have been a tough conversation. Hopefully it happened the week before the MLS draft, and Tim Bezbachenko was on a local radio station here where he was explaining. They asked him what he was doing in the lead up to the MLS Cup, and he essentially said, well, I'm not doing anything to do with the MLS Cup. I'm working on 2017, and which seems surreal. But I'm sure at some point in the week lead up to that, they would have told Clint Irwin exactly what was happening, so that he would not have been taken aback by the situation. And that's the strange little thing about Major League Soccer. And Kevin and I. So go ahead, Kevin.
One thing that did take me back yesterday, Dwayne, was Donny Toya, first overall pick in the expansion draft. A lot of people are talking about maybe an ex-ante, which would be a future compensations for the Montreal Impact if he was taken first. We'll see how that goes. But Donny Toya picked first by Atlanta, then traded to Orlando for the 8th pick in the super draft and coming in the next few weeks. So for for Atlanta, I was kind of surprised that Donny Toya was the first overall. There was maybe more or bigger and better, so first choice available out there. So maybe that's why people are talking about maybe future compensations would explain why Donny Toya was picked first overall.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that drives fans nuts about Major League Soccer is its lack of transparency about stuff. Because if let's just say, for the sake of argument, at the super draft, the super draft, we haven't done that in a while, but at any rate, when we see the super draft, you might see something strange happen. That Atlanta United trades their natural third round selection to the Montreal Impact for TAM. And you'll be like, what does that even mean? But that will probably be to do with this, right? Like, and you'll have to connect the dots in your own head, but MLS will never connect them for you. And that's sort of the stuff that happens all the time in this league, and sort of the stuff I think that many of us think that they need to move past. But until they do, it's important that managers, that owners, that everyone involved in an MLS level work that system to the best of their advantage. And I think that if that's what's happening here with Montreal, and if that's what we know would happen with Toronto and Bloom, then you got to applaud the teams for figuring out what the best system was for everyone involved.
Yeah, no, exactly. A few other players that we've talked about in the past were chosen. Like Cullen Warner will be in Minnesota. Minnesota basically took midfielders. They were still looking for center back. And now the question is, and it's been said by a few sources like Matt Doyle, Tim Ream might be thinking of coming back to the United States. Taylor Twellman started this. And if he comes back to the United States, now Minnesota is in top of allocation because Atlanta would use it for Guzan, so Minnesota would be on top. Does Tim Ream answer the center back deficiencies for Minnesota? That's a good question as well because they didn't address those in the expansion draft.
Minnesota hasn't addressed much of anything, and they continue to be fascinating to me in terms of how they're going about building this. It's so weird to see an expansion team come in because we haven't seen one lately that has come in with, I don't want to say little ambition, but come in with such modest ambition. Really, they seem to just want to be an MLS team and see how the cards fall. But it'll be interesting. The Guzan, the other part of that too, and we talked a lot about this with Rudy yesterday. Atlanta is more and more looking exactly like the way Seattle launched, right? Like even they're going to sign a DP goalkeeper. That Seattle launched that way too. Oh, they signed the Swedish fella, I forget his name, Larson. That he came over for a while, but it was. It's a very similar sort of launch, and I guess Atlanta probably might take some stock in the fact that Seattle is holding that trophy, even though they didn't get a shot on goal. Where's the salt?
They got the shot on goal in the penalties, I guess. But those don't count.
Right.
No, but other names that were standout: Zach Lloyd of FC Dallas got picked up by Atlanta. That'll be interesting. Other name known: Alec Khan, a backup goalkeeper. So he will probably be the backup goalkeeper for Atlanta behind Guzan. Because Atlanta picked two goalkeepers in the expansion draft, but yes, Clinton was to get Mark Bloom. So that will be very interesting. And the next agency now too, Dwayne, it's the start of free agency. So apparently, according to Nick Martineau of TVA Sport, there is one other team going after Dominic Gaudreau, giving him all that he wants. But apparently, he wants to stay in Montreal in the hope that they still can get an agreement done with Mauro Biello and, especially Adam Braz and the technical side of the Montreal Impact.
Yeah, in the experience, as we saw last year, really Drew Moore is the benchmark now that everyone's going to use with those free agents, that you can get an impact player that does change the culture of a team significantly. And I don't think anyone would doubt whatsoever that Drew Moore was absolutely beyond the DPs, probably the most important player on that team, and they acquired him through the free agent vacancy. Now that said, Justin Mapp, who is a guy that we all thought might be the most impactful,
the first ever free agent in Major League Soccer,
and he's a free agent again. So it shows that not all is going to work out because they are older players that you'll be bringing in just by the nature of it. So,
we can just I have the list in front of me, Dwayne, and I'm not going to go through it all, but you have players like Connor Casey, Corey Ash, Tyson Wall, Sebastian Letou, Markin Papa, Sean Franklin could be interesting out of DC, former LA Galaxy player, just a map once again. Alan Gordon, Jeff Laurentowicz, Eric Kronberg of the Montreal Impact, backup goalkeeper. Dom Maduro, again, we're talking about, and a few other names here in the list. The one that stands out, Javier Morales, maybe Jamison Olave, heyday with the Red Bulls a few years ago. And you have players like Steven Lenhart, Clarence Goodson, and from Toronto, Will Jobson. Captain Canada, will he change address once again? Hercules Gomez as well. So those are a few of the free agents on the market right now from MLS.
Yeah, and I think that most of the talk here in Toronto will be about Will Johnson. Quickly on the expansion front, we'll get back to that. Maybe we'll revisit some of those expansion targets in a little bit there. This thing continues to be less and less relevant, though, in many ways, in terms of the actual players that you got. And I think that was illustrated, greatly yesterday. What they're getting is assets. And just to go back to that conversation again, you have to think about it that way when you're a fan. You have to understand that a first-round draft pick is an asset that can be either used to select a player in the draft, or can be used to bring in money, or can be used to bring in another MLS player. And the value of that draft pick, as I've illustrated a few times, and that was a conversation Kevin and I had over the weekend MLS Cup, is diminishing. But what isn't diminishing is TAM and GAM and stuff like that. So that's why you saw a lot.
You know what it reminds me of? Maybe a draft pick is Bitcoin. So you cannot redeem it everywhere, but some spot, if you're smart enough, you'll redeem it. And you'll get true value, if not even more, and you can get lucky. That's a little bit what a draft pick is. It's like Bitcoin.
Yeah, well, and if you want to get, let's say you have some Bitcoin and you can redeem it somewhere that can get you something of value that someone else might want, then you might be able to then turn around and get that value from
Exactly.
that person. Yeah, it's like a trickle down thing,
Yeah,
right? And
exactly.
that's in terms of the Montreal losses. Montreal did actually lose 2 players yesterday. What are your thoughts on that?
They lost 2, gained 1. Chris Duval, former New York Red Bulls defender. Interesting. He usually a center back, probably either starter or close to it. Good backup. We'll see if that means that Montreal doesn't re-sign André Lefebvre. That will be interesting there. But the fact that they got a defender, they lost Tony Toya, which was on the wings. Ambroise Oyongo, Camara showed that they could play there, so we'll see. Maybe that will be the combination for next year, with Duval being maybe the 3 in the middle with Cabrera, Sima, and Duval. So that's probably the way it's going to look next year. But the loss of Venegas, for me, Yohan Venegas never showed its true potential playing for the Montreal Impact. We saw him a glimpse of what he could potentially do, the way he is used differently with the national team of Costa Rica against the U.S. men's national team in the big win for nothing a few weeks ago. He was instrumental with scoring the opening goal in that game as a false 9. We'll see how impactful he is with Minnesota, how they will treat him, how they will maybe give him more offensive responsibility or maybe even more freedom. Maybe that's the type of thing that he would need going forward, because he does have that freedom with the national team. But when he plays with Montreal, it seems like responsibilities or just having to control maybe too much always makes him second guess every single move that he does and never showed his true potential. Outside of maybe 10 minutes in the playoffs, we haven't seen the Yohan Venegas of the national team ever play for the Montreal Impact.
Yeah, and you talked a lot about Venegas in the past year for a player that was playing as much as he was, and was,
there's something about him that I like. It's hard to pinpoint. I like his movement. I like the potential. It's like never broke through in Montreal, and I think it's a shame that it's a combination, probably different factor. And he had the chance to leave in transfer windows before, and he wanted to stay to prove him something to himself, to learn, to become a better man. And he is a great man if you hear all the players talking about him since his departure. So there's something I like about Yohan Venegas, not only because he's number 27, but there's something special I like about him. And it's hard to pinpoint, but I think he does have the potential to be a game changer, not just a player, but to be a game changer if used correctly in this league.
Struck you as a Daryl Sittler lover. That was a bit of a Toronto burn there to the Montrealer. But at any rate, I don't even know if you got that one. Kevin 27 was Sittler. He was a Toronto. Never mind. No. Okay, yeah. We follow. All right, we're back. Let's look quickly on Bloom. Bloom, I think that Mark Bloom does represent the entire Mark Bloom saga with TFC does represent growth for the franchise. And bear with me on this. When Mark Bloom came in, he came in during the low year in 2013. He was coming in as the NASL Defender of the Year prior to that, which tells you a little something about the difference in talent level. But at any rate, he did actually perform well in that first year and was one of the better players. And they rewarded him with an increased contract. In past times, and this was one of Bezpachenko's first moves, in past times, TFC probably would have just let him go and tried to chase some bright, shiny toy instead that would have come in and done the same or worse of a job, and the stability would have been punished. So he stayed with this club through a year where he was injured and did not play, came back, had a limited amount of playing time this year. He has a very young family, as we said off the top, and TFC, rather than just put him through the ringer and bring him back again and not have him play and force him into situations or trade him somewhere where he doesn't want to go, they made it work to get him back close to home. And that doesn't seem like much, and it really shouldn't be much, but in the past, TFC never did that, and they developed a terrible reputation with players in the league, which hurt them for a very long time, and they're finally starting to break out from that. And how they treated Mark Bloom here, I think, is just another example of how they are breaking out from that. And if you're a TFC fan, you should take some solace in that. The Whitecaps yesterday, Kevin, they didn't lose anyone in the expansion draft. They acquired a right back, which they had a right back that they traded to Toronto last year. So this is kind of funny. But anyway.
Yeah, from Houston, Sheenan Williams for general allocation money.
A good old Gam.
Gam's been busy yesterday. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, all I'll say on this is a replacement level player, if you want to use a baseball terminology, and I still don't think I understand why they got rid of Beta Shore. I don't think anyone in Vancouver completely understands why they would trade Beta Shore, and especially why they would trade Beta Shore to Toronto. But alas, they did, and that's good for TFC and not so good for the Whitecaps. But they have a player back that might allow them to have a little more stability back there than they did this past season. And that was really their one major move of yesterday. As I said, bringing in kind of a replacement level guy is nothing to be overly excited or overly upset about. Kevin, any final thoughts?
No, we're good. We'll talk about it
All
later.
right, let's take a break. We're going to come back and we're going to talk the friggin' Argos.
You are listening to Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio. Visit sportspodcastingnetwork.com for more.
So
Yes,
after you're done hitting your head on the desk, Dwayne, apparently, if you just read headlines, you would think that Giovinco blames the turf and the Toronto Argonauts responsible, not just for his crime, but for his entire bad season.
Yeah. And look, we talked about this yesterday on the show. Laura Armstrong, among others, tweeted out the comments that Sebastian Giovinco made in the season ending, like the locker room cleaning press conferences that they always have. I'm just trying to find the exact quote here, but if you don't want it to, you can just go back and find them yourself. They're everywhere. The long and the short of it is that he said that having the Argos there potentially made his season worse. And that didn't go over well with certain members of the Toronto Argonauts Football Club. They ripped Giovinco, and as the football crowd, and for the purpose of this story, I will use football to describe the hand egg type sport we're referring to, which I actually do enjoy, and soccer to talk about soccer. So the football players did not really respond well to this, and as they're apt to do, they went back to their most base and horrible instincts by calling his manlyhood into question. And that is always where the football crowd loses me, because they tend to think that way, and that tends to make it a little difficult to empathize with their concerns about the stability of their franchise. At any rate, I don't know, Kevin. It's still a whole thing, and it's the star, the sun, or should say the sun is having black.
All right, let's just go down the road. Is the pitch responsible for Giovinco's cramps on Saturday night? Let's just put it that way, because that was a question. And that's what he alluded to.
Yeah, a couple things here. I don't think he's going through a translator first, right? So you have to keep that in mind to understand maybe whether he's not necessarily being interpreted perfectly well, that his language barrier is playing a role here to make this sound worse than it is. I don't think that the turf was necessarily causing his hamstrings to cramp, but I do think that there is a possibility that the turf was not as perfect as TFC was trying to make it sound like all year.
There was, to be fair, there was paint used, and that's what I've been told for the number 30th game between the Montreal Impact. It looked better than it should have after the Grey Cup, because of some of them were, let's just say, finishing touches, like painting different colors to make sure that it looks the way it should, and that we all know has been used. So maybe there's something to that.
Yeah, and this is something that's all like I tend to believe in. Look, I'll take the football side very softly here for a second. I do think Giovinco is probably just frustrated, and this is probably an exaggeration that is happening right now.
For sure. Like, we're talking about the grass no, exactly. We're way beyond that point.
Yeah, and look, the issue that the soccer crowd can take absolute control with is stuff like Rob Bragg, the Saskatchewan Roughriders. He's a receiver for Saskatchewan Roughriders. Said that's some serious mental weakness. Dude needs some help. I mean, you know what? I'll be blunt, Rob. You need some help. You need to have a little bit more perspective in the world and a little bit more understanding of the differences of your sport. The other thing that some people the other one that got a lot of attention was the Black. What's his first name? The player Black. Javinko, #Javinko. Both my hamstrings would have to cramp off the bone before I took myself out of the championship game. Mr. Black, you take yourself out of the championship game every 30 friggin' seconds. Football is a stop and start sport. There are tons of times to treat a hamstring on the field. You get that, right? You understand that a soccer game is constant. It's 90 minutes, that you can't have a trainer come out and work on you for 2 minutes, go off the field, and then come back on again and do it like that. And you get like 10 minutes when the other team has the ball. You have to defend too. They're just not having any comprehension of the difference in sports when it comes to that stuff at any rate. But that's it's silly. But what it's also, like we said this yesterday in the show, is like, I don't know what TFC's end game here is. Like, I don't know what their players' end game is. I don't know whether they're trying to pressure the scheduling for next year so that there's less overlap. They could be complaining about the long break because they had to play midweek, or that Seattle had a few more days rest is what I mean. I mean, there's lots of things that they could have been trying to influence for moving forward. But the one thing that I don't think they can influence, and the one thing that TFC fans need to get out of their head, is that as much as it kills me to say it, they can't influence the fact that that team is there. And they're there for a long time.
Yeah, no, exactly. The changes has been made. They have their own locker room. They have their end zone. It's all there, and everything worked. And we'll use hindsight maybe in the next few years to assess that partnership and how the stadium sharing has been. But so far, outside of those comments, I have to say that it went maybe better than anticipated.
Yeah, it did go better than anticipated this year, and there are some caveats I have to that. And I say these to Kurt Larson anytime he brings it up on Twitter. There was no major rainstorm that happened before or during a football game this year. There was no mud issue. There was nothing really that challenged the field in any real way, with the exception of the short turnover from the Grey Cup to having to get it back for the second leg of the Eastern Conference final. And in the exhilaration of that night, I don't think there was much comments made of it, but there could have been problems on that field that weren't really showing up on TV that were coming out. And that is really what it comes down to. And the field is going to be challenged a lot more next year, because one of the things that happened this year is because of the long road trip and the fact that TFC has first priority in scheduling, and that is not going to change. The fact that they do, though, and combined with that long road trip, meant that they had to backload their home schedule. That will not happen again. Thank God, because it's horrible from a fan perspective. But what that means is the Argos will have greater flexibility in their own schedule, even with second choice, which will also then mean that there will be more opportunities for there to be games less than a week apart. And that will happen more next year. And that will put a greater challenge on that pitch. And if there is something that's happening out there, they do need to figure it out now. And perhaps as I say this, as I work this through my own head right now, maybe that is the end game. Maybe they are understanding that as players and trying to get this in front of them so that the TFC understands that it's not perfect and they need to figure something out, because next year the issue is going to be more front and center.
I think it's just not excuses, but it's just something that Javinko said that for him was just a comment in passing, and it went way, way out of proportion.
Yeah, and I don't think any Javinko right now.
Like, he didn't set off to sit down this in press conference and be like, "I'm going to blame the pitch." No, he was asked a question. What in your opinion was the reason why you cramped up that night? He's like, maybe the cold, maybe it was the pitch, and then it got taken out of proportion.
Yeah, and I suspect that Javinko today is not, flipping through Twitter and reading the Toronto Sun to try and see what the fallout of his comments are. I suspect he's, either holed up in his house in his, $1 million condo, enjoying life, or he's on a plane going somewhere hot. So it's not that it's really concerning him that much. But what I think is important here too is to look at the comments that came out of it from the TFC, from the team perspective. Let me read Tim Bezpachenko's comment greatly here in full, and we can talk about that. There were one or two games where it was less than adequate in terms of recovery from the field. And this is Tim Bezpachenko again. The Grey Cup was something that was planned, but our championship games were uncertain. We can't blame that. There are things you can do. You can look at the calendar. Even just a few hours makes a difference. Again, I'll leave no stone unturned in terms of providing a surface that's not just average, but one of the best in the league. comments from Bill Manning. He said the club is considering making or changing the entire pitch mid-season. And they've also talked about the possibility of re-examining the hybrid surface that a lot of people misinterpret when they hear and only hear hybrid and think it's something that it's not. A hybrid system is 98% grass.
Yeah.
It's not
I was gonna say 98% grass and 2% blades. It's basically blade support for the natural grass.
Yeah, it's more about the roots, right? They put fake blades in that have something underneath the surface that allows, like a metal rod, basically, that allows the roots to grab a hold so that the grass is stronger. There has been, we know so much about playing surfaces, it makes me frightened sometimes, but at any rate.
For non-players.
Yeah,
knowledge that we know they're not supposed to use.
Put it on my resume. Expert on sports playing surfaces.
On soccer playing surfaces versus others, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The one thing that was stressed by Bezbatchenko went specifically to them that there are no plans to now or in the future put in a complete artificial surface. The one thing I will say about that is that through reading and talking about all of these different playing surfaces and technologies over the past 2 years, I have come around the idea that there may come a time in our lifetime where an artificial playing surface is the same as a grass playing surface. And so we might see something like that a decade.
Maybe better. Maybe it'll be better like in 15 years. Maybe actual plastic will grow. Who knows? Maybe somebody will figure that out.
Exactly. And I don't think that any of us that are purists when it comes to this should close our mind to the idea that technology can evolve.
You have a field-wide 3D printer that just comes on the field and just builds the field before each game.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
The future.
You never know. And I mean, look, in League One, there's your bingo card. We're probably mostly using second gen turf fields in a lot of the places, but there's a couple third gen surfaces out there, and the differences are night and day. They really are. There's the one surface I worked on quite a bit, and there's a surface I worked on quite a bit this year that was grass. And I can tell you up front that there are field turf surfaces out there in the city of Toronto at that level that are better than that grass pitch, for sure.
That's the analogy. Great grass is better than great turf, but great turf is better than bad grass.
Exactly. Yeah, there's gophers in the one field I'm talking about. I have to fill a hole in every time I work there, which is fine. It makes me feel like Bill Murray a little bit. That was a Caddyshack reference if you didn't follow that one. Anyway, this is just such a strange little story that this is the offseason in a nutshell. And I think maybe it might be speaking to the need for those that covered TFC and that have followed TFC closely for the past 2 months of this playoff roller coaster. Just needed something to yell at. Just needed an enemy right now, because we can't really be mad at Seattle for the fact that Toronto couldn't score on Saturday. I mean, you can, but it's illogical and it's very fandom, right?
Well, and the way they did it too, it was deserved. Like we've all seen Roman Torres on Javinko. We've seen the marking, Marshall doing great and stopping Altidore as well. We've seen it with our own eyes. It's not like they were lucky and everybody missed the net by 5 foot. No, there was a defensive game plan that was executed almost to perfection, if not to perfection, by Seattle.
Yeah, precisely. And this is, I think, just a little bit of transference is the psychological term that I would use that is happening right here. So there's an opportunity for this whole CFL v MLS battle to reflame itself out. This won't be remembered by the time next season rolls around, but I don't think the Argos and TFC are going to be doing any charity events anytime soon. But that's never going to happen anyway, because as a reminder, and this seems to be something that people still, for some reason, continue to not know or realize or care, MLSE does not own the Argos. 2 of their owners do, but they are not part of the MLSE family, which means that they don't really have to get along if they don't want to. Just some people may wish that they do. And we'll see. I've decided that I'm just at peace with the Argos now. It's something that I fought, something I don't agree with. I'd be the first to promote a new stadium. I have promised that if the Argos are ever to move into a new stadium, that I would in fact buy season tickets. And I maintain that because I do want sports in the city to be successful, and I would support them at that level. As it stands right now, you know what? I may go to a couple games next year. StubHub $10, whatever. I'll do that if there's nothing else to do, because it is a nice night down there in the lake. And other than that, though,
Depends how cold it was. I have to say, Saturday was quite something.
exactly. All right. And I suggest, people can look at the Argos any way they see fit at this point in time. And I think any emotion is correct. It's yours. But you might want to just get at peace with it. You know what? It's done now. So let's try and make the best of a bad situation and move forward. Moving forward is what we're going to do now, though. Let's take a quick break.
You're listening to Soccer Today on SPN Radio. You can find the on-demand version of this very show on iTunes, Stitcher, Feedburner, Podbay Player, Podbean, anywhere you get your podcasts under the Sports Podcasting Network feed. Subscribe to our YouTube page to make sure you never miss a live show talking about soccer today, the MLS postgame show, open lines after dark, 5 rings daily during the Olympics. Make sure you subscribe and give us a follow on Twitter at SportsPodNet and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network.
Let's turn our attentions overseas, Kevin. We haven't spent a lot of time over the past month, for obvious reasons, talking about the Premier League and other leagues in Europe. So I think over the next week or so, and we're still working our Christmas schedule out. There's some adjustments in terms of, where we're going to have to do the show from and things like that, but we'll figure it out. But nonetheless, I thought we'd start by looking at the Premier League today, and we'll go do about this in a very simple way. I asked Kevin, and I did the same myself, to sort of look at one surprising team this season and sort of talk about that, and one team that's disappointing you this season, and we'll go about that. And I'll start with you, Kevin. So if you want to just talk with, we'll start positive.
Yeah.
I think I know where you're going to go with this, but
quite easy to figure it out.
Yeah, who's surprising you the most right now?
Chelsea. 12 wins out of 15 games played, 1 defeat, 2 losses, 33 goals for, 11 against. The Antonio Conte 3-man backline 5-2-3 type of experiment is working great for the Blues right now. With a win versus Sunderland today, they would be 6 points clear from Arsenal on top of the table. That would be quite an accomplishment, because then it's a drop-off, and that would be close to mid-season. A big lead on top of the table for the Blues, which didn't start off that well. So it really is telling of how the tactics and the players at the right spot. The redemption year for the Victor Moses, David Luiz, with a weird head-scratching type of signing, but him adjusting his play to what Conte wanted, and becomes a revelation once again as a center back. So you do have a lot of things happening with this club, it all going in the right direction. Diego Costa might be the most informed striker in the entire planet right now, and that is because of the way they're playing, integrating him, giving him the service, absorbing and finishing in the counter. Really doing a great job for Chelsea.
Yeah, at a Premier level, he's, this is a comparison that's probably never ever going to be made again. But Costa is doing what Donadell did, right? In terms of, he's figured out the league that he's in and has reined his game in just enough that he's still able to play on the edge that he needs to play on to be successful, but he's less discipline prone. He's less.
I see what you mean. I see what you're saying. Like Donadell, the first season, or Laracima wasn't the best because he was a little maybe too not cautious enough, and then they dialed it down just a little bit, but yeah, still being effective.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. Now, that's a comparison you're never going to hear again, because they play completely different positions at completely different levels of the game. However, that's where I was going with that.
So that's my positive side, is the way Chelsea has been able to adjust their play. And Conte, here's my big theory behind it. Once you arrive at a new place, you kind of have to establish yourself. And there needs to be a transition period. You cannot just change everything at once. If you just come here, you're like, okay, we'll continue where the road we were, and you're not getting result, then you have the opportunity to look, see where we're doing something wrong. Listen to me now, and we might figure out something together.
Yeah, and look, the Chelsea is, as you said, 6 points on Arsenal, but as importantly, they'd be 9 points on Liverpool and 10 points on City and 13 points on Spurs.
And that's an equal game because City's not having an easy game today as well. So either for Spurs or Man United. So no, Chelsea could really. We're not talking about winning the league here. We're just talking about mid-season having a kind of a 3-game cushion, maybe on top of the league.
Yeah, and it's really kind of a. Yeah, exactly. And that's quite surprising this year. But it shouldn't have been, really, when I think about it. They're also a plus 22 on the goal differential, and that's equally as important, as I can tell you as a Man City fan, that goal diff can matter.
Yeah. On that note, Arsenal are 20 up, so it's not that big of a gap there.
There you go. Let's move our attention now to the negative side. Well, I'll give my positive first, and I'm actually going to go with a team like Bournemouth. And the reason I'm not going to go into detail with this a little bit too much, but I like to look at Bournemouth, Watford, those teams there that are top of the table right now. If you look at the size of that club, that size of that community, not a lot of people have been to Bournemouth, but I have. So I have a good concept on how small that place is. For it to be not only in the Premier League, but excelling in the Premier League right now. And they are basically 19 points away from safety with more than half the season to go. That is not something that I think most of us thought would happen. That is not something that most people dreamed would have happened, but especially in Bournemouth. But I don't think they're going to be a Leicester, but they might become a Stoke. And for a city like Bournemouth, that would be quite the accomplishment. So right now, with them sitting in 8th place on 21 points, they always say 40 points is where safety is. It was 38 last year, I believe. So they're almost there, and that's a phenomenal accomplishment for a club Bournemouth's size.
No, you're absolutely right, and I forget the name of the head coach right now, the manager. But for Bournemouth, they're mostly English team with mostly English mentality and how they came up and how they're staying up as we're speaking now. So no, there's a lot of good things coming from this club in Bournemouth.
Yeah. All right. Let's go negative. What's your disappointing team of the season?
Oh, it would have been easy to choose Leicester City because Leicester with the augmented expectation because of their championship season last year. But for me, it's Sunderland. You had a quote unquote maybe top 15 type of roster, and with David Moyes, it's just going down the drain. They have a few results lately, but before that, Sunderland was the worst team in the Premier League, and I think still now they're the worst in the Premier League. It hasn't played well. There were 9 defeats in a row to start the season, if I'm not mistaken, or 9 wins, 9 games without a win. It was quite a difficult year, and it still is for Sunderland. And it looks like this year might be the year the Black Cats get relegated.
The cockroach team of the Premier League? I don't know. They'll finish 17th.
With David
worry.
Moyes, it's getting late now. And it seems like they're going to go with him. So if they go with him, maybe they're going to go down with him.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're only 2 points back at the point, but this is a team that just simply is
West Ham could have been in my deception as well with Bilic at the helm and their new stadium situation where they haven't seemed to find ways to get results in their own stadium, feeling like they're always playing away games, supporters not having found a way to all get back to where they used to be, or all those question different sidelines, different feel. And that place hasn't become a fortress Olympic Stadium that it could have been London Stadium now. But so for West Ham, they haven't had the good season as expected. A team that usually is expected to be in the top 10 in the Premier League now and going closer to maybe play European football in the next few years. Right now, they're in the 17th place and they're still battling for not to be relegated.
Yeah, and well, West Ham would be. I was actually going to pick West Ham and Swansea as my disappointments. So I'll just continue the thoughts on West Ham and then talk about Swansea briefly. And then I'll briefly mention why I'm not putting Man City in there because I'll do that in a minute. But anyway, in terms of West Ham, as you said, the movement into Olympic Stadium, the fights they're having with their fans, the frustration around that, we shouldn't be too surprised. Change is hard. And most people, if you've been living in an apartment for a bunch of years and suddenly you have to move out, you're going to fight that, right? You're going to not enjoy the fact that the same corner store that you went to is no longer going to be there.
Even more your neighbor. Your neighbor is going to change, but hey, it's life. It happens.
Yeah, exactly.
To move on with it. And hey, if you can get back together, then you can. But if not, well, maybe you have to find a way to still get that feeling back.
Exactly. Sometimes you as much as you want. You can't get back together, but maybe you can still be friends in a little while. And I think that's kind of what's happening with West Ham right now, right? If we continue, we'll drop the breakup
to be
analogy
fair,
now.
it's easier to do that when you have wins to cheer for. So it all starts there. Kevin Nolan.
You say West Ham needs to get back on Tinder? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's a lot easier when your team is winning to get the right swipe than the left swipe.
Exactly. So get yourself back out there on Tinder, West Ham. That's what you need to do. Anyhow, let's move back. West Ham, as I said, I think that I've always said this before, and I said this in the lead up to that. I think they're a sleeping giant of a club. If you've ever spent any significant time in London, you'll realize how popular West Ham is, how many fans they have. It is it's a London club, and it's one of the biggest London clubs, obviously, and that's attractive to players.
And it's an old club with history, the way it was created back in the company days, when company had the Arsenal, all those teams. The history is fascinating if you go down to the history of how those clubs came to be and how they evolved. West Ham is one of those.
Yeah, and as they have potential, and I always thought that moving into the Olympic Stadium would provide them with an opportunity to better fulfill that potential, because the revenue would start to match what the potential was a little bit. I'm using the word potential too much, so I'll stop. But nonetheless,
nobody could be accustomed to ambition. So the revenue stream would be equivalent to the ambition they want to have. And then you can start going after a little bit bigger, better players, bigger as in name, not necessarily as in stature, better players to help the team grow as well and become closer to a Leicester or closer to a Tottenham that have risen their profile in the last decade than another type of club that would have got relegated a few years ago.
Yeah, precisely. But instead, what's happening is that there's this pushback. And then part of that, too, and as a City fan, and maybe I'll segue into that a little bit here in a second, I kind of get that, because there was a mourning period for City fans when they sort of lost, when the money came in. It seems counterintuitive. But there was, as I said, there's a book called Manchester City Ruined My Life, which is a sequel to a book called Manchester United Ruined My Life. And I've talked about this before on the show, but the premise of the second book, the follow-up, which was written several years later, and sort of talks about the change of the club went through, is that to certain fans, it seems like the soul of the club is being betrayed. When you, in West Ham's case, leaving the grounds just makes them feel that way. They think that it's not their club anymore, that they're used to like making fun of Arsenal fans and sort of taking the piss out of City fans because of the money and stuff like that. And now suddenly they feel like maybe they're one of them, and they have trouble coming to grips with that. And there's a lot of anger right now happening. And there's a lot of frustration in terms of what's happening on the pitch, obviously. And I just can't help but that whole toxicity around this is just all playing into what is happening in East London right now. And that's what is happening. Quickly on Swansea, I mean, there's not much to say other than the fact that it's disappointing to see Bradley struggling so much as a manager. And counter to that, if you want to have some fun one day, like Google like Bradley out or something, and then see how irrational the fans are reacting to the passport that's there.
Like, it's putting too much on what Bradley has an influence, the amount of comments and negative comments towards him, towards what reality is. Like, not everything is his fault. It was that way before he got there. He's still trying to right the ship. It hasn't been rightened yet. So, of course, it's not still going in the right direction.
Yeah, and again, there's a bit of transference going there, to use that word as well. Bradley is a trigger for all of their insecurities about the loss of the identity of their club and their game. There's foreign ownership, Americans to boot, which really rubs them the wrong way, coming in with an American coach and even openly talking about bringing American players in. And for certain fans, that is challenging. That is threatening even. And I think you're seeing a bit of that coming out. So Swansea clearly has been disappointed. It'd be sad to lose Wales completely from the Premier League. It's only been a little while since they've had consistent presence. But
yeah, well, we have Cardiff for a brief moment that came up and then went back down.
Exactly. If Swansea goes down, there will be no more Welsh teams in the Premier League, and that would be unfortunate for the people of Wales. I wanted to say I'm defending the fact that I'm not including City in my most disappointing list here. The reason I'm not is simply because I've talked about City and I've talked about the issues around City a lot on this show lately, and I didn't think it would really be adding much to the show. They clearly are one of the more disappointing teams in the Premiership right now.
Like, let's face it, they'll play in the Champions League. They'll have third, fourth, or they'll be in the Europa League for sure. The question is the title already too far gone if Chelsea wins against Sunderland today?
Yeah, and that's the question. They do need to get on a roll quickly, and I think that if you're reading the press, there are some indications that Pep is coming around to the idea that he needs to change his ways. And as I've
Yeah, you
said
mean
before,
he needs to show them how to tackle?
yeah, well, they need to defend better.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's absolutely what it comes down to. But it's his greatest influence was always going to come in the transfer windows for the first few years. And I think what's really troubling people, and we'll stop after this, is that the biggest and most dramatic thing, the two biggest and most dramatic things that he's done is he sort of shot Yaya Toure out, which Yaya Toure is a hugely symbolic player to Manchester City. He's the player that represented the first legitimate star that has been associated with that club at that level in many years. Like they've had other stars, is not what I'm saying, but you know what I mean. Like at a top club, to have a top player at a top club, they hadn't had that before. Toure came in. He was at times the best player in the Premier League, and he won them an FA Cup and 2 league titles, not by himself, obviously, but he was probably the most important outfield player during that time in City's history. And to separate from him was a very big symbolic gesture, right? That this is a guy that's the past and I'm going to be the future.
Yeah.
The other movie made, similar, symbolic, moving Hart out, huge part of the past in the history of that club. Bringing in Bravo, the guy he replaced him with, and the mistakes that he continues to make in terms of the most basic aspect of the goalkeeper's job, stuffing the ball.
Or not bad passes that you're like, oh, damn it, he leaves the ball over. Oh, no.
Yeah, it's causing some pushback against him. And there were a few people out there that were pushing back earlier on before he was named. But now this is a big challenge in his managerial career. He needs to prove that he is magic and that it wasn't just the fact that he has coached Barcelona and Bayern Munich, who have an immense amount of talent. They have, by their nature, the best talent in their respective countries. Now he has to do it in a league that has huge competition for talent. You cannot create a Real Madrid in the Premier League. You simply can't, because there's too much money there and there's too much competition for positions. And so there's
too many people who would want to be that team. So in effect, it's going to create 4 or 5 of those teams, which is the case if you look at it.
So he has to figure out how to do the same things he's done at the super clubs in a league that can't, by its very nature, produce an elite super club in the way that a Real Madrid or a Bayern Munich or a Barcelona is. Yeah. All right, Kevin, let's take a break. We'll come back with a few bits and brights to wrap her up.
The bits and bytes on Soccer Today. St. Clair, their new single Cheating, available everywhere.
What's old is new again. The LA Galaxy have acquired the rights to Jermaine Jones. Kevin?
Yep.
This doesn't seem like the Galaxy are changing their ways.
No, but I still have a doubt that he's going to be a LA Galaxy player. If you go back to his reaction right after Colorado was eliminated, the free agent baby, quote unquote, tweet that was deleted very shortly after by Jermaine Jones might indicate where his future lays, because he's a free agent outside of Major League Soccer. So if he feels like he wants to be a free agent, he has the entire spectrum of football ahead in front of him outside of Major League Soccer. We'll see now if being the Galaxy might interest him in staying more than Colorado training him somewhere else.
You're absolutely right. And that is what he meant by that. And a lot of MLS fans went, wait, he's not a free agent by the rules, blah, 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 blah. But that's, of course, ridiculous, and it's why it's ridiculous that there isn't free agency in MLS is because the whole world isn't going away. At any rate, no, I do think that there is a chance that Jones ends up in LA because LA has the money to spend, and that's really what this guy wants. Now, the question is, should LA want that? Because I felt, and I think others felt, that moving away from Bruce Arena represented an opportunity for the LA Galaxy to change in a fundamental way, to make them Dallas with money is what it would make them, because they have the potential with that academy that they have and that wealth of talent that they sit on in the Southern California area that they currently have a monopoly on until LA2 comes in. Sorry, LAFC comes in. I keep calling them LA2.
No, LA2
But
is their USL affiliate. Los Dos,
yes,
but Atlanta, because I see the wing, so I do it again. But the Angels, the Los Angeles FC, coming in a year's time.
yeah. So they've started to do some stuff, but until they really get moving, they really do have a monopoly on a very huge and very talent-rich area. So
Well, they
you
have 12
compare
months left. There's 12 months left of that monopoly. How they will
Yeah.
handle it, that's going to be the big difference.
And I don't think bringing Jermaine Jones is how you handle it. They've got kids in that system that I think that they need to start working in. And if they continue to go with the big DP kind of approach, and as I've said, talking about Toronto in the past couple of weeks, I think you can still bring in 3 DPs. That's not the issue. But this just seems like as a first move post-arena, symbolically, to continue with that trend today, it does seem a little odd to me. And it does seem like maybe they haven't completely moved away from their old ways. That said, Jones can be an effective player in Major League Soccer. I just don't think he's a player in Major League Soccer that's going to play 34 games. 34 games flying all over the country, playing on turf, doing all those things that really wear people down. I think at this point in Jermaine Jones' career, when you look at it objectively, you can suggest and see that that's probably not something that he's going to be able to do. And you would have thought that the Galaxy would have learned that lesson with the last high-profile midfielder that they signed and just retired in Steven Gerrard.
Yeah, but there's the devil's advocate that would say that the last 2 teams Jermaine Jones played with overachieved and were in the playoffs way further than expected. The Revolution went in that run that got into the conference finals with Jermaine Jones, and he got that suspension and went to Colorado, and the Colorado made it to the Western Conference Finals. So the caveat may be that, look, maybe he does bring something to your team in Major League Soccer.
Precisely. All right, couple interesting points there to move from this topic in terms of the MLS Cup TV ratings. They came out, and of note, it was a record here in Canada. 1.5 million Canadians watched the watched the MLS Cup. That is by far by 100,000 the most that have watched an MLS game. But prior to that, it would have been a massive improvement. Of note, there were more Americans, more Canadians by number, not by percentage, by number than Americans. That makes sense because there was a Canadian team involved. What do these things say about the potential for the Canadian, for the soccer market in Canada on TV? And I hate to be the devil's downer here, but I think what it says is something that we all know. Canadians, by their very nature, are inclined to get behind and get on a bandwagon of a Canadian team, regardless of where it comes from in this country, as much as we bicker on regions. We're apt to jump on the bandwagon pretty quick when a Canadian team is doing well in an American league. And I think the numbers would have been the same if the Impact had been playing. They would have been a little bit more heavy to RDS, obviously, but there still would have been huge numbers watching. And that just speaks to that sort of psyche that we have. And it's one of those challenges that the Canadian Premier League is going to have to face when it launches, Kevin.
Yeah, no, exactly. But there is a soccer market. That's what you're seeing. Yeah, it was generated because maybe Toronto was there as well, and the covers was amped up, and it was records as well in the United States for the MLS Cup. For what it's worth, it was one of the top 10 watched soccer game last 12 months. So that's important. At least you want that to be happen. So that is the case.
Yeah, I haven't seen the regional breakdown in the States. I suspect there were a lot in the Northwest that would have watched it both positively and hate watching it in Portland. So there would have been that.
Well, yes. And big markets probably as well. It's a big city. The big spectacle is usually translatable to big markets, even though those ones might not be included in the actual game itself.
Yeah, when you look at the numbers in Canada, to get back to that real quickly to wrap, they very much correspond to what you see for a European Championship final or a World Cup final. World Cup final will be a bit more, but a big game like that, the Champions League final.
A big club championship game type of.
Yeah. And to me, that's showing you a pretty accurate reflection of what the ceiling of soccer is in the country. And it tells you that the ceiling for soccer in the country is more than enough to sustain soccer broadcasting. It's difficult to get there consistently because there are a lot of people on that ceiling that would call themselves, that are open to soccer but wouldn't call themselves soccer fans. And that's change. That's a change from 20 years ago where you would have had a lot more people that were not open to the sport, that just wouldn't even, they'd flip by it as fast as they could. They'd get angry at people that were talking about it. That used to be the case. We're not there anymore. We've evolved to the point where soccer is just another sport that is on the menu of choices. And for some people, it will be number one. For some people, it'll be number 5. But, if there's something that draws those people that have it at number 5 in, they'll come and watch. And that's what we saw, I think. I don't think we saw anything that's going to sustain. I mean, you might get a tiny bump next year, but it won't be anything during the regular season that will really, in fact, the bump that we'll get in the regular season will be something so small that people will talk about how it's disappointing, and we'll have to probably bring it up on this show, and that'll be real fun.
Well,
we have to.
You know what we learned, though? Winning and playoff runs generate viewership. If you're looking at it in Canada, the Montreal Impact and Toronto's run have generated viewership. That's what we learned over the last few weeks.
Yeah, and and winning, it's catches, like it breeds other winning, and
It's
breeds
exponential.
more.
Yeah, it's exponential. The more you have it, the more exponentially it grows faster.
Yeah, and it even crosses sports, I think, when you're talking about the overall general conversation of sports viewership. So the Jays going deep into a playoffs, the Raptors going deep into playoffs in this city, in this market, is just getting more and more Torontonians going, you know what, I'm going to check the local team out. And they just might not care what the sport is. It's just about watching the local team. And you might even see that if the Argos win the Grey Cup. You might.
It's basically 3 playoff runs that followed each other. So the gains that each sports made were maybe transferable a little bit to the other ones when that one continued.
4, really, because the Blue Jays had 2 in there. So, yeah.
True, yeah, it's almost non-stop. Oh, well, it has stopped, but it's a Leaf, but you take the Leafs out, and the same time frame, Raptors have one. So there's the Raptors, the Jays, and TFCs.
Yeah, well, and look, I know that we're making this Toronto-centric, but they just did play the MLS Cup final. So, bear with me, people. Yeah, there's also part of the greater narrative of Toronto sports and the Toronto sort of psyche when it comes to stuff. And this touches on the Instagram post that I was going to talk about specifically that Michael Bradley made yesterday that has a lot of people here talking, where he talks about that. He said, the line that I'll take from it is, he says, if I've learned one thing in the 3 years I've lived here, is that nothing comes easy for Torontonians. And that's actually something that I think Torontonians take for heart, that we stay with it and we keep going forward. And it's like the roots of this, it's a Protestant working city, right? Like there's that kind of lunch bucket or lunch pail mentality is something that really appeals to Torontonians, to their detriment sometimes. But nonetheless, I think that the fact that these sports teams are getting closer and trying to break through and just quite can't make it, but are still good enough to inspire, is something that's really creating momentum for every sport, save the Argos, in this city right now, and TFC is taking advantage of that. Kevin, when it comes to that, the Instagram post, and there was also comments by Javinko where he said that he wasn't done here. There were still things that he wanted to accomplish. Both of those players seem to indicate publicly that they have every intention of returning for 2017 to try and finish this job that they came, well, basically one Clint Irwin stop away from accomplishing this year.
Or just tomorrow not hitting the bar.
Yeah, well, they still had more work to do if that had happened, but nonetheless, certainly that is something that is refreshing for Torontonians. And I think I said it earlier in the playoffs that if Toronto had a deep run, that you would likely see this team return for one more shot at it, because there is a window here. But if they failed again early in the playoffs, I thought you'd probably see them break it up. As much as I think Javinko probably has in his head a little bit of frustration about certain elements of Major League Soccer, and I do think next year will be his last year in Major League Soccer, I do think that those comments that I saw in the last day or two do suggest that Toronto FC's roster in 2017 will look very much like it looks right now, minus a few tweaks here and there. And they have, I think, one more shot at it. And that's a scary thing for fan, because it's fleeting. Things are fleeting, and this can go away as quickly as it came, just as we see it in every other sport, just as we see it in life. And that's where we're at. And it's scary right now, but hey, you keep fighting and you keep moving forward.
It's not about how you get hit. It's about how you get up and you keep moving forward.
Precisely.
Thanks, Rocky, for those great words of wisdom. And until tomorrow, 11 a.m.
Sorry, go ahead.
Have a great soccer. You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com.